Psst, check out my Patreon.
Okay, I mean, I guess this episode isn't all that bad. Sure, it's not action-packed or exciting because it leans more on the comedy side of things, as most reboot episodes do, but it certainly beats out the last two episodes, that's for sure. Salamander is going for a certain theme in this episode, one that I find works once you've watched the entire thing through. It seems like the writing of this episode is super incompetent at first, but once you come to realize that the decisions that are made are done for the purposes of hyperbole, it really does the ending a great service. Also, this is another situation where I'd consider this to be a Bubbles episode instead of the mixed title card that the reboot gave it. It's really starting to feel like the reboot just gave up by this point with that whole aspect of the show. What was once a unique addition that enhanced season 2 has become the norm, and it's lost all of its appeal. I'm honestly tired of seeing the mixed title cards at this point. This is also supposedly a parody episode of G.I. Joe the animated series, although I've never seen it before, so I don't exactly have the comparisons ready, and since barely anybody was talking about the show at this point in its release, I couldn't find any documentation pointing out the similarities. Also, I know this is a rather controversial episode for some people, but truth be told, I like this one more than I don't. You'll see what I mean as the review unfolds.
Are you tired of poking yourself with your fork?
Ouch! Ouch! Ouch!
You should try the Cork Fork! Cork Fork! Order today!
This episode begins with the girls watching a commercial on TV for cork forks, these nifty little contraptions that prevent you from sticking yourself in the eye with your fork. Never mind the fact that you can't eat with them, but hey, what do these consumers care? They're just glad they can't stick themselves with them. These things are clearly marketed towards individuals with a very low IQ, as indicated by both the professor's and Mojo's purchases of the item, which is ironic considering these two are supposed to be the scientific genius characters of the show. I can't believe it took me this long to notice, but I'm really starting to believe that this reboot is anti-science. Still, as you saw, the professor gets kidnapped by this salamander guy and whisked away to his hidden volcano lair, which takes substantially less effort to find than the girls were initially expecting.
Who do you work for?
Ha! I'll never tell.
If you tell us, I'll give you this chocolate milk.
Is it whole milk?
It's 2%.
Salamander's his name, and he's the baddest villain who ever lived. And a volcano shaped like his own head.
What can I say? The power of chocolate milk has a strong effect on weak-minded grunts. So under normal circumstances, this blatant exposition dump could be considered superfluous and ruin the entire struggle the characters would usually need to endure in order to succeed. However, there is intent in making this random henchman spill all of the crucial information that the characters need in order to progress forward with the story. It really sucks because I want to explain the logic right here, right now, but at the same time, I don't want to give the answer away, so I'm gonna have to bite my tongue for the time being. This grunt ends up spilling the details of where the lair is, what the girls need to get in, and even hands them a parking pass.
Okay, girls, here's the plan.
Wait! Here's a map of how to get there.
Okay. Now
And here are our key codes to the secret lair.
Great. Now.
The best entrance to the island is on the north side, but be careful, the jungle's full of deciduous trees.
With this slew of new information in hand, Bubbles begs Blossom to let her lead this mission because she had promised she could the last time they were tasked with a rescue mission like this. Buttercup even caught it on video, once again proving that the girls used their phones as a camera, which made Blossom's VHS recorder all the more out of place in the long skate home. Speaking of Blossom's negligence, she reluctantly agrees to this proposition because she understands the severity of the situation and requests that Bubbles saves her claim to lead for a different mission instead. Their own father's livelihood is at stake after all, but instead of understanding the circumstances, Bubbles continues to cry and whine anyways, which she basically is acting like a spoiled brat who isn't getting what she wants. And Blossom is in the right here. You'd think Bubbles would think of the bigger picture and take things a bit more seriously, but at the same time, I don't really care about the professor's well-being, so it really doesn't matter to me. Another thing that cushions the blow is that the professor is in no real danger at all. Although an audience member likely wouldn't know that their first time watching this because we've never seen the Salamander villain character before, and neither would Bubbles, so this doesn't excuse her selfish behavior. We don't know what this guy is capable of or where he falls on the comedic to threatening villain scale. Maybe this guy needs him for his experiment. Maybe he's related to the professor somehow. Maybe he's just gonna kill him. him. There are several possibilities here as to what this villain wants, and we have yet to learn what his real motivation is. Bubbles does intend to do her best on the mission though, so credit where credit is due. She is determined to save the day, she just wants to be the one to lead so that her sisters can do things her way for a change. And so, Bubbles has the three of them grab their stuffed toys, cork forks, and water flotation devices so that they can sail out to Salamander's evil Volcano Island lair.
Sailing, sailing, sailing is our biz. Say, is that a seagull?
Of course it is.
Is that even a song?
You're probably wondering why they didn't fly. Well, because Bubbles is the leader. That's why. Despite all logic and reasoning that Blossom suggests she follows, she decides that this raft is the best way to do it because that's the Bubbles way, I guess. This is really weird for me. Like, I definitely want to criticize Bubbles for making these terrible decisions, but the entire concept of the episode is that these ridiculous things are what actually ends up working for the best. It's not supposed to make sense in service of the humor. It's like how Bubbles scored an insanely high SAT score by drawing a flower and him diddle riddle. Sure, it wouldn't work out this way in real life, but that's where the humor lies. That's the entire point of the episode's story. That's where a lot of other reboot episodes have failed time and time again, because it usually makes illogical decisions that hinder the story, rather than present examples that illustrate it as the point of that story. The key here is to make this distinction from other reboot episodes where random humor comes into play. But again, I will elaborate on this when we get to the very end. Just hold those thoughts. It's just like how once the girls arrive on the island, Salamander sends his blue team of scouts after them, resulting in Bubbles commanding her sisters to throw their stuffed toys at them. Normally, that wouldn't do a thing, but here they cause the grunts to inexplicably explode on contact and kill them.
No! What?
Blossom is completely dumbfounded by this, and again, this illustrates the humor that lies in the success of what is expected to fail. This differs from a situation where, say, the girls magically get the clouds to move out of the sky in total eclipse of the cart so they can freeze Jamore with a decelerate that's only supposed to slow her down. That whole sequence doesn't work because A, it's the grand climax of that special event and is a total deus ex machina that gets the characters out of an unwinnable situation. B, it breaks the established rules that the episode already laid out, and C, it's not even supposed to be comedic. Watching these grunts explode after having a stuffed animal thrown at them is funny because it's ironic. You wouldn't expect a stuffed animal to cause an explosion. You usually think them to be soft and light, something incapable of causing severe damage. Oh my god, I can't believe I'm actually explaining the joke. It is here where we learn that the professor hasn't changed since Frenemy because he's willingly helping the villain build his doomsday device and progress with his scheme. He isn't held against his will. He doesn't put up a fight or demand he keeps his daughter safe. He's not even tied up with indestructible rope. He's just gleefully and freely tightening this keystone for his grandmaster plan without a care in the world. Fuck this guy. Next, Salamander sends out the red team, and Bubbles commands her sisters to pull out their cork forks, remove the corks, and politely ask them to leave them alone. This is the result.
Please leave us alone, Mr. Henchman!
Oh no! They're asking us politely!
And they have forks!
It's stupid, but it works. Although I find that by removing the cork from the fork, it undermines the entire point of what the cork fork is in the first place. It also feels needless because the girls could have just pointed with their nubs and it would have had the same effect. This just feels like a case of keeping an unfunny running gag going when it doesn't even need to be there. Next, Bubbles and her sisters approach an intersection and have difficulty deciding where to go.
Looks like the way to Salamander's lair is left, and the other way goes to certain doom. This is a tough one. We better think about it.
Patience is a virtue, one that Bubbles seems to possess. Not Blossom though, as she intends on saving their father's life as soon as possible, so instead she groans and complains that Bubbles is wasting their time, only to get picked up by this owl bot and carried off to Salamander's base of operations in the exact same manner as when she was carried away in Phantasm Chasm, while Bubbles and Buttercup fly around panicking all willy-nilly. She awakens to find herself trapped in Salamander's battle pit where she is forced to fight every creature he throws at her until she gets worn down. You may be asking why she doesn't just fly up out of the pit and punch Salamander in the face. Well, unlike most reboot episodes, which would just ignore this plain fact, there's an invisible barrier preventing her from doing so. Back with the main characters of the series once again, Bubbles cries because she doesn't think she can pull this off, while Buttercup gives her a strong pep talk with words of encouragement to keep pressing forward. She exclaims that she truly believes in her sister, and points out all of the successes that Bubbles has had thus far.
You think I can do it?
Of course you can. And you know I can't lead. Remember what happened last time?
Oh yeah. That was bad.
Not gonna lie, this was really cool to see coming from Buttercup. However, given what we know about her in this reboot, this feels extremely out of character for her to be saying, considering all of the other times we've seen her and Bubbles interact with each other. Buttercup is more likely to demand that she be the leader of the team than just be complicit and follow along with Bubbles' actions. This clip right here claims that Buttercup can't lead, but this directly contradicts all of the other episodes, such as Clawdad or Blossom Cubed, where she does, and she takes Bubbles under her wing and guides her, not the other way around. Every time Blossom goes off and does her own thing, Buttercup takes on the leadership role. Perhaps if this had more of a focus on Buttercup wanting to give Bubbles a shot instead of being the one to lead all the time, I could maybe see that, but for her to be depicted as being incapable of leading the team is a straight up lie, especially considering she's always the hero while the other two stand in the background and wave. After some recuperating, Bubbles proceeds to regain her confidence and pursue the volcano lair with Buttercup.
Works like a charm.
Stop right there, Salamander!
Wrong evil volcano layer.
Oopsie!
For once, an obligatory Mojo reference fits in rather well. This episode really did manage to make the random humor seem less random because there are legitimate reasons as to why these jokes are portrayed. Mojo has a word-a-day calendar in Mojo the Great, but there's no reason for him having it outside of a running joke. Here, the volcano mix-up makes sense because both villains have a volcano lair. It's a fitting bait and switch to pull over the audience. But hey, this wouldn't be the reboot without inconsistency. We return once again to Salamander's lair, where we see that Blossom has defeated everything he's thrown at her to the point that he's getting very, very desperate. So desperate, in fact, that he had to resort to sicking regular animals on her because his superior creatures weren't enough to stop her. But it doesn't really matter because she's still trapped inside the containment unit anyways, so why even bother continuing to try? Thankfully, her sisters arrive on the scene to put an end to this villainy, but unfortunately for them, they're too late. The professors finally finish tightening the same bolt that he had been messing with this entire time, and Salamander proceeds to follow through with his plan accordingly.
We have to stop him! Do something! Okay! La 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 la. Now we're all doomed!
Gotta say, that's pretty genius and really highlights the sheer incompetence of this villain considering his entire plan hinged on it being daytime. Although I'm not really sure how Bubbles showing up and talking for 30 seconds managed to distract him long enough for the sun to completely set. I mean, there's not even an establishing shot showing that the sun is going down or anything. The girls were in broad daylight just seconds ago, and now it's as if 6 hours just magically passed by. I love this way of causing the villain to fail, don't get me wrong, but there could have been a better execution in showing the time of day passing steadily over the course of the episode instead of just randomly cutting. This breaks the overall flow of continuity and comes off as distracting more than anything else. Bubbles seems to claim that her actions were reflective of her knowing that this was the plan the whole time, and her sisters commend her for it. But I don't know that I really buy it. This comes across as a coincidence more than an intended action on Bubbles' part. I mean, do we really believe that she knew it would take the professor all day to finish his machine? Did she really know that the stuffed animals would make the henchmen's bikes explode, or that they would drive off course by being polite? No, she didn't, and it was better knowing that Bubbles was being a ditz rather than her claiming she knew what she was doing and stalling the whole time, because it undermines the point a bit more. Then again, maybe her stalling line is only in reference to her going to Mojo's lair instead of the Salamanders, but the mix-up makes it seem like she didn't know she was doing that. So I'm afraid I'm not going to give Bubbles any credit here. And hey, if Salamander couldn't use his machine until the professor had finished it anyways, and the professor finished it just as Bubbles arrived, survived, then really, isn't it the professor who deserves the credit for stalling, not Bubbles?
Why'd you wait until we got here to deploy it?
Simple! To show it off!
So it was already done a while ago, but he just let the professor pretend to continue to work on it? I at least get the aspect of the supervillain wanting an audience to watch him succeed. But again, how did Bubbles even know Salamander wanted an audience and that he was waiting for her? This relies on Bubbles knowing more than she should. But because of this, Bubbles is then credited as being a fantastic leader, and Blossom even comes around to her despite expressing her strong doubts less than a minute ago in the exact same room. This show is really terrible at portraying character progression, I gotta say. And then, in a twist of events that I honestly didn't see coming the first time around, Salamander reveals himself to be a certain foe that we are all too familiar with.
It's not fair!
After all this time, I, the Gnat, was finally going to have my revenge on you Powerpuff Girls once and for all!
Dude, who are you?
The Gnat!
Glad they kept the forgotten name gag going this far into the series, and yes, suddenly the gross incompetence of everything that just happened in this episode makes a ton of sense. The henchman who spills all the information, the blue and red team barely putting up a fight, all of these monsters being easily defeated by Blossom, the sign at the two-way junction, and even his failure to act before the sun set is all accredited to the fact that the Gnat is the farthest thing from a legitimate threat. Hopefully now all of what looked like stupid coincidences make more sense and you can see why I enjoy it. Under normal circumstances, this sort of ineptitude and convenient happenstance would get under my skin, but when there is a character whose signifying trait is gross incompetence, failure on that character's part is expected, and with this being a comedy, exaggerated to a humorous degree. The Amoeba Boys would be another example of characters that exemplify this sort of clumsiness and would fit this bill. The only thing I don't really like about the ending is, you guessed it, the professor.
Well, now that this magnifying glass is done, I guess I'll just move on to building the Destructo Ray.
Oh, better help contribute to the destruction of more innocent lives. Fuck out of here. But that brings Salamander to a close. A very boring episode title for a not so boring episode. Still not quite as action-packed as prior season 3 plots, but certainly more interesting than In the Doghouse and Quarantine. This is a divisive episode for me and many others because there are some things that I really do like and other details that I detest. I'm torn on whether or not I actually suggest watching this as a result. Really, it comes down to personal preference, though, I mean, if you absolutely hate Bubbles' behavior, then I completely understand why you would dislike this episode because she does come across as super spoiled and self-centered. Although, if you enjoyed the preposterous strategies that she employs which leads to her success, then I can see that as well. But that about does it for Salamander, which means next up is Small World, the other multi-episode TV event that the reboot had that nobody else on YouTube other than myself really ever paid attention to. Been looking forward to this one, and I can't wait to dive right into it.